Thank you. I will just repeat the opening remarks and introduce myself. My name is Judy Kefagona. Thank you for joining us for the 7th monthly dialogues that we are having on current issues, contemporary issues in sustainable tourism. We have a focus on Africa, but we believe that sometimes the values and the principles go beyond the continent of Africa. Today, we are honored to be hosting Dr. Sisco Auala from Namibia University of Science and Technology. I met my sister at the Sustainable Tourism Africa Summit, where she came in as a speaker, and her presentation was on communities and community integration in tourism. But she touched on Indigenous knowledge and why Indigenous knowledge was significant in sustainable tourism. And so today we have a chance to listen to her in-depth presentation as she also delves into answering questions whether sustainable tourism or the concept of sustainable development is new to Indigenous community, or the first communities as they are also known. Is it a concept that is totally new, or it is something that over time has been repackaged and become appealing to the international community? But there are pockets of communities and Indigenous knowledge systems here and there that are the backbone of what we call sustainable development principles today. Allow me to give you one example of my working experience that convinces me that Indigenous knowledge systems are indeed sustainable systems. I've had the opportunity to work, I still do work with communities in the Masai Mara region of Kenya. In the tourism world, Masai Mara is known as a wonder of the world because of the migration. It is known for its prolific wildlife sightings on game drives. And then people know about the Maasai. Indeed, some people don't know that Kenya has any other community except the Maasai. I blame it on tourism because sometimes tourism does not tell holistic stories of place. They continue narratives that have been there and which were founded and created from a certain particular interest. And so while working at Masai Mara, one of the programs that I was involved with is the formation, the conceptualization and formation of community owned or community conserved areas in Masai Mara. And I came to realize while working and having a lot of dialogues, those who follow me know that I like to talk about the grass room and not the boardroom. So while sitting under the grass, on grass and under the trees, we got to learn a lot of wisdom from Maasai Indigenous knowledge systems and how this has enabled them to coexist with wildlife for years, to preserve the savannas for years. One of the things that I found really profound was that no Maasai ever put their homestead next to a wetland. All wetlands were respected and preserved. No Maasai put their homes on the frontage of a river. No Maasai put their homes around a well. All these places were sacred and they were preserved by Indigenous knowledge that these are the places where life flows from. We cannot contaminate them. We cannot own them. They are collectively ours. They bring life to us. And so in the dry season, when everywhere else was dry, they found refuge for their livestock. They found water for their livestock in the springs that had been preserved by Indigenous knowledge that simply said, these springs are springs of life, and therefore we must protect them and they cannot be owned by any individual. Then come tourism, and tourism starts to build next to the springs because it wants pristine places. Come tourism, and tourism wants to build in the riverfront because it wants great views. And these are the same riverfronts where in the dry season, in those riverbeds, the communities will take their livestock there. And so in our modernity, we start talking about human-wildlife conflict. But why? Because those same places that were preserved by indigenous knowledge have now been opened by commerce. Because we need more tourists, we need more lodges, and the lodges can choose wherever they want to locate their facilities. So indigenous knowledge preserved, yeah, modernity created conflict. So even as we were talking and negotiating where the communities are putting boundaries on where they would have as conservation areas, they were very careful about where the springs were, about the access to the rivers. They were very careful about forests where they would go and perform the rites of passage for their young people. And that is how they preserved the forests, because nobody would go and log in those forests, because in those forests, the young people, Morans, would go and stay there during the rites of passage for a long time, learn their traditions, become strong men, eat the herbs and eat from the herbs and from the forest. But somebody else who has no value for that tradition and indigenous knowledge sees a place where we can go and place another tourism facility. And that means we've got to clear the forest. So as we begin, I have practical examples of how indigenous knowledge systems preserved nature and stopped degradation. And nobody wrote this, and nobody took them to conferences, and nobody wrote protocols that have to be signed by nations. But common belief systems amongst our people can be strong enough. And these are the same things that we're talking about today when we talk about sustainable development values. Let's use with caution. Now we're talking about environmental impact assessments. Let's assess before we go there. But there were indigenous knowledge systems that enabled us to do this. I'm not the presenter of this day. The presenter of this day is Dr. Sisco Auala. And allow me, ladies and gentlemen, now to welcome Dr. Sisco to proceed with her presentation. Most welcome, Dr. Sisco.
Thank you so much, Lee, and thank you so much for the beautiful introduction. And I love it when you have a practical experience of what we are going to talk today. And I know you've made me as a presenter, but we are both presenters in our own ways. So please feel that you are also a presenter. Before, I just want to thank Judy and Michael and the rest of the STTA team for the invitation. And before I start, I always like to greet everybody in my Indigenous language to set the tone, if you don't mind. In Namibia, it's morning. I don't know, there might be others who are in different time zones. It might be afternoon or evening, but I'm going to greet you as and in my language, Sararapo o meme no tate, which means good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And when Judy actually told me about the topic of today's conversation, I got so excited. And because it's really something that is close to my heart, Indigenous knowledge, and how tourism can be used as a tool to bring positive outcomes in preserving our Indigenous knowledge. And I know there's a lot of examples that are also negative, but we should look for the positive and strengthen the positive. And in my talk today, try as much as possible to bring in my own experience, because as I was introduced, I'm a researcher and a lecturer at the Namibian University of Science and Technology in Windhoek. And my background is in tourism. I studied tourism from undergrad to the PhD level. I did my PhD at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. And before that, I've been working in tourism from marketing and management, work with communities, And currently now I am busy with research for the past 3 years to do with indigenous knowledge of astronomy. And most of my examples, I'll be referring to this research that I'm working on. And I'm working with the Nyai Conservancy, a San community in northeastern part of Namibia. So I'll be giving a lot of example referring to this research that I'm working on. So I've prepared a few slides just to guide my talk this morning. And I'm gonna start just to move the slides. Okay, I hope you can see, is it moving?
Yes, yes.
Great, great, great. So this is just the content of what I'm going to touch. It's a very few slides. This is what I'm going to touch in my this morning. And if I can start off with a quote from one of the indigenous knowledge holder from the Nyanyai Conservancy, Koma. He says, my father could dance the traditional dances. And if you are very ill and sleeping, he would dance until you wake up. Even if you were sick for a very long time, he just start dancing. Now I see that traditional learning is very good to pass on to future generations. So I just thought I'll start with that quote as we go into the conversation today. If we start off by, let me just move quickly. If we start off by looking at indigenous knowledge and what actually is indigenous knowledge, through as an academic, as a researcher, I've been reading a lot about the different definitions. There's quite a few definitions of what indigenous knowledge means, and different scholars have tried to define it. And through my own experience working with indigenous communities, I would like to understand indigenous knowledge as a science of indigenous people. It's actually their science, their way of life. Yeah. And this knowledge has been transmitted and acquired over centuries. And it's transmitted from one generation to the next generation, mostly through oral traditions. It could be through music, dances, artwork, festivals. It was always around oral tradition. And we don't really understand why. Maybe there's a reason why this ancient knowledge was honored through oral tradition. So we need to do more research to understand it, because as we are in academia and in tourism, we think another way. We think we need to document this knowledge. We need to write books so we can preserve this knowledge. But indigenous people have their own ways, have their own reason why certain knowledge systems, how it should be acquired, how it should be transmitted, and how it should be represented or used for tourism consumptions. So this is the basis of my understanding of indigenous knowledge. And over the years, I'm talking from the perspective of the African context, because this is where I have most of my experience from the African context. But sometimes indigenous knowledge is also very much, when I read case studies and other examples of indigenous communities in other parts of the world, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of the same challenges that indigenous communities are experiencing regarding their transmission and acquiring and preservation of their indigenous knowledge. And in the African context, there's really have been a lot of misunderstanding of indigenous knowledge. And I would think that it could be because of our historical past of colonization, because in the past, indigenous knowledge was not given any value at all. There was a belief that indigenous knowledge or indigenous practices are primitive, and when you need to suppress this knowledge. And only now, recently, in the recent years, we're starting to awakening to the value and the importance of indigenous knowledge. Not only the indigenous knowledge holder themselves, the whole world is actually coming to asking questions, a lot of questions, and a lot of questions coming related to issues that we are experiencing now: climate change, what is happening to human civilization, are we all going to be living in space? You know, people, I think after COVID, there was a change in how humans are asking deeper questions. And indigenous knowledge is now coming into the front line. People are trying to find maybe the old Western knowledge that we have acquired over centuries, maybe it's not providing us some of these answers. Why don't we look into some of this ancient knowledge, how people in ancient time use certain knowledge systems to solve problems, whether it's to do with the environment, climate, health, anything to do with our existence. So now indigenous knowledge is gaining momentum, and people are awakening to the crucial importance of this knowledge. But now we are tourism professionals. We are also seeing how important indigenous knowledge, as Judy has explained, she's given practical example about the Maasai, and how over centuries they lived in harmony. Because if you look at each knowledge, it's always related to balance, yeah? Because these people live in harmony with it. Let me not say these people, all of us, we can say we are indigenous people in our own way. And we live, all humans before, we all live in harmony with the environment. And because of modern evolution and development, we have detached ourselves from the environment. At the same time, when we detached, we lost some of that relation that we had with the environment. I'm not talking only about the terrestrial environment, but also the celestial environment. Because even with our research concentrating on indigenous knowledge of astronomy, I've realized that the sand people had a relation with cosmology, and that gave them answers to some of the problems. Even if you look back to ancient times, yeah, these problems of climate change, they had happened before in many human evolution and civilizations. They had ways of adapting and providing resilience to these issues. And now we're realizing that maybe we can find answers. Maybe we can find answers in ancient knowledge or indigenous knowledge, which I would like to call a science. It's a science of indigenous people. I know we don't have enough time, and I get very excited about this topic, but I will try and stay on track with time. And Michael, please just keep on sending me reminders if I'm taking too long on one slide. So I've talked about basically how I understand indigenous knowledge through my experience research and working with indigenous communities. And also now the question to ask is, what role as tourism, what role can tourism play in giving value in a sustainable way to Indigenous knowledge. So Indigenous knowledge can become a tool to educate humanity on some of these issues we are experiencing today, and integrated, or I like to use a word, actually not integrated, I like to use harmonize the Indigenous knowledge systems into modern science to find problems, to solve problems of what we are experiencing today with regard to sustainability. Maybe tourism can, a role that tourism can play, but it's a conversation and discuss it further. Just going to the next. So now when we're talking about sustainable tourism has also been defined over many, we all know how the concept came about. But we shouldn't be limited by the definitions, the definition of sustainable tourism, because the one that we usually use mostly, it was really developed from sustainable development, and things have changed, and we need to now try to incorporate how Indigenous knowledge can become a resource for sustainable tourism. And in the African context, we never really give enough value. We practice, say we have cultural villages, we have conservancies, but these cultural villages, these conservancies, I would like to call them Indigenous knowledge centers. They are more than just conservancy. They're not conserving only. There are libraries. There are our research centers. Cultural villages are research centers, and they are holding a lot of rich Indigenous knowledge. And like, for example, in Namibia, if I go to a cultural village, I think I'll pay like maybe $6 to go learn about Indigenous knowledge of a certain culture. And the way I feel like that is undermining the rich Indigenous knowledge of that cultural village, because we need to realize that Indigenous knowledge is like gold, yeah, and it just needs to be mined properly and represented properly as a value. And in tourism, we have been using Indigenous knowledge already, yeah, in the way, in community-based tourism initiatives. For example, I can say in crafts and arts. For example, the jewelry that I'm wearing now is from the Nyai Nyai Conservancy. And there's good examples, and the skills used, this jewelry, it's part of Indigenous knowledge, yeah. And the question is, how much value did I give to this Indigenous knowledge? Yeah. So these are the questions we need to ask, and how we can really package our Indigenous knowledge to give it value, and to use it in such a way that there is respect for that knowledge. When you look at, for example, the model of cultural village, obviously there are positive to cultural villages and also negative impacts. But sometimes we portray our knowledge in such a way that does not give it enough value and respect from from people who are visiting it, because it's almost like you come to a cultural village and you come for entertainment. Yeah, you're coming to be entertained. Instead of using these cultural villages as rich indigenous knowledge centers where people just don't come and be entertained. Tourists are looking for more than just entertainment. Tourists have changed now. You have conscious tourists who want to come learn about sustainability practices. They want to learn about certain things. They just don't want to be entertained by certain dance. They want to know the meaning of the dance. Because sometimes dances are used for rainmaking, just giving examples. So they want to understand that. So let's use our indigenous knowledge, educational tools to educate visitors. And in this way, we give more value to the indigenous knowledge. And we also give value to the visitors because they are not just coming to taste your food, to be entertained, but they are going back transformed. They've gained knowledge, yeah, of your indigenous knowledge. From the research I'm doing, this is my perspective of how I think indigenous knowledge should be a resource for sustainable tourism. So this can be done through the revitalization and the preservation of indigenous cultures, because it's one of the positive impact of using indigenous knowledge in tourism, because tourism does provide ability to revitalize indigenous knowledge and preserve it as well. It's done responsibly. And also to remember that, like most indigenous people have spiritual connection to Mother Earth. Beside Mother Earth, they have spiritual connection to some of even heritage sites. Heritage sites, some of them are sacred sites, yeah? And they were used by indigenous communities for certain rituals, yeah? Some of them are even used by certain communities to connect with nature or to even connect with the universe, with cosmology. And when we take this away from indigenous people, there's a disconnection, yeah? Tourism should support indigenous people to practice their connection to Mother Earth. And these are the kind of things that can be education tools in indigenous knowledge centers to teach the tourists, to teach how indigenous people connected with Mother Earth, how they connected with celestial bodies, yeah? It could be education centers. So we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about tomorrow, yeah? Because we know what is happening to today's world, things are happening fast, and we need to think about how to use this knowledge as an education through tourism to educate people about the important indigenous knowledge in creating the harmony that was there between humans and nature. So this can create inclusivity, representation of indigenous people, because they are always mostly marginalized. Because I mean, indigenous people, like for example, when you look at the Dogon people in Mali, you go visit them dressed in cloths, and you know the perception of them is they are poor people, but forget that these people are the one who's old. Maybe are the one who's holding our answers to the problems we're experiencing in today's world. So we must look at the representation and create cross-cultural exchange, because tourism is an industry that is the only industry that provides opportunities for cross-cultural exchange and mutual respect and understanding. It drives cultures from different parts of the world to mingle, to create respect and understanding. So as part of sustainable tourism, let's use indigenous knowledge and indigenous people to be represented with respect as holders of answers to our problems, and create respect and understanding. So this is one aspect. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So now when we look at now I'm talking about my research specifically as an example of how I feel that we could integrate Indigenous knowledge into sustainable tourism. It's still a work in progress, but it's a model that I believe could help in looking at things differently and trying to do tourism differently with Indigenous knowledge as a center of sustainable tourism. As Judy has shared that most of sustainability is not something new to Indigenous people. It's before even the word sustainability was written, Indigenous people were already practicing sustainability. And so if that is the case, then why can we in today tourism not integrate Indigenous knowledge as a center sustainable tourism development? So this is a model that I'm working on. It's to do with dark sky tourism development. And dark sky tourism is a branch of astrotourism to do with astronomy. And in Namibia and many African countries, we have the advantage of having a pristine dark skies, unpolluted, especially in rural areas. There's less pollution, light, and if you look at the Western world, most have never even seen the Milky Way in their lifetime before. And that is very sad. And now with my research, I am trying to document, not only to document, actually to understand how Indigenous people had a relation with the night sky. Yeah, and I've started recording some of the star rolls and myths and knowledge of Indigenous astronomy, working with the Indigenous people in Namibia. And through this process of collecting these star rolls and knowledge, I realized that there is such rich Indigenous knowledge of astronomy that I always say Indigenous knowledge is gold that needs to be mined and responsibly. And Indigenous knowledge of astronomy in Namibia is fading away. It was not given any value because obviously it does not fit into the Western paradigm of scientific knowledge, so it didn't get any value. And even in tourism, it was not really much. And it was disregarded. Yeah, we're always concerned about the traditional tourism products of wildlife, what we see on the terrestrial, what we have on Earth. But we forget to look up in the sky and realize we have a shade sky. And of our skies, especially in rural areas in Africa, they are still pristine. So it's another resource, it's another gold mine that needs to be mined responsibly. So we need, so I realized, so this not fading away, it's not being used. And I'm trying to find now ways to use, so in Namibia, stargazing has always been a tourism attraction. You come to Namibia to enjoy the pristine night skies. But there was Indigenous interpretation There was no telling of the names of the stars in our different languages. Even me in language, I've forgotten most of the names of the stars. Yeah. And this is knowledge taking away. And now I'm trying to find ways to integrate this indigenous knowledge of astronomy into sustainable tourism development, working with the communal with the indigenous people. And indigenous people in Namibia, they're really having a lot of challenges with poverty, land insecurity, marginalization, stigmatization. So really need to diversify some of their tourism offerings. Like I say, in the Conservancy, obviously they have tourism, like cultural villages, and they have paris offerings and other forms of economic activities, but they need to diversify. And indigenous astronomy, dark sky tourism is one area that has less negative impact on the environment. It's an easy activity to set up because it doesn't require much infrastructure. You just need an open space in nature and view the night sky. So the structures that needs to be put up is maybe camping. It's things that communities can easily set up campsites, environmentally friendly campsites. But it requires less impact on the environment. So I'm working on finding ways now to integrate this knowledge through storytelling or through dances, or finding ways to represent this knowledge of this astronomy to visitors in a sustainable way. As I mentioned, it's only 2 elders currently that have for the case study that I'm working on. It's only few elders that have knowledge of this indigenous astronomy. And so we need to really preserve it and use it as a resource that these communities can benefit from. So in my conclusion, I touched on a few, but this is a conversation, so we will still go into questions and continue with our conversation. But in conclusion, I know I touched on very many issues, but in conclusion, I would just like to say that as we look into the future, we really need to do two differently, and we need to place indigenous knowledge at the center of sustainable tourism. And I want to also share the quote. It's an African proverb that says, knowledge is like a garden. If it's not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. Thank you so much. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sisco, for enlightening us with that opening remarks, and also sharing the studies that you are doing to show us that indigenous knowledge systems indeed were broader than what we see in the terrestrial. And there is so much more resource that is waiting to be utilized by the tourism industry, but in ways that are responsible. You have highlighted and repeated that indigenous knowledge is a science of indigenous people. And we all know that science has a method, yeah? Science has ingredients. There are things that come together to make it work. So when you do that dance in isolation, and you do that dance in isolation of other ingredients that will make that dance valuable, then you have actually diluted that particular practice, which was a way, and I liked it so much that you shared with us how indigenous or ancient knowledge was transmitted over generations. And I think this is one of the things that has been lost today, how knowledge is transmitted. Every time you go to many conferences and people are talking about climate change and all that, and the question is always asked, how do we get indigenous people to understand this? I don't like that question. Personally, I don't like it when it is asked, how do we get indigenous people to understand? Indigenous people have knowledge transmission systems that has worked for them over time. They had their own way of preserving knowledge. They preserved it through song and dance, and those songs were transmitted through festivals and celebrations. When they were sung, the next generation got the knowledge. So they know. We just, and that's why I keep saying, if we were to get the tourism license from communities, we will never struggle with how tourism will support indigenous knowledge, or even how tourism will support the preservation of our cultures. But because we do it the other way around, we do our things and then we find out how they will fit in. That's why we ask these questions in boardrooms and not in grassrooms, where we say, how will we get them to understand climate change? How will we get them to understand that tourism is valuable? Instead of going to them and asking them, what is valuable for you at this time? How will tourism be valuable? How will tourism add value to what you already have, right? What are the ways in which you addressed extreme climate conditions? How did you even perceive them and prepare for them, right? So that you survived them, yeah. And so I liked it so much when you talked about in ancient knowledge transmission systems through generations that were through song, through dance, through word of mouth, through art, through food, through naming, even our names in indigenous knowledge passed a message. If probably you were born in some communities, if you were born in my community during a drought season where there was not enough food and people were going through hunger, you got a name that was for that season. And that is how they remembered the year of the famine. Because then they will ask, which year were you born? I was born in the year of the famine. Yeah, and that is why my name is like this. So those were systems of transmission of indigenous knowledge from generation to generation without losing them. So they never used the pen to write, but they used names of the children and seasonal names to document their seasons. They use song and they use dance. And I think as tourism utilizes, wants to bring, to connect, or like you say, to harmonize, to use the word harmonize and not to integrate, then we must understand, we must be deliberate in understanding, first and foremost, these indigenous systems of transmission of knowledge. I found that extremely profound, because today, the way tourism transmits culture and shares it with visitors is in what you have described. We have cultural villages where there is not much of connection that is happening. There is more of performances and presentations, and these presentations are not in context. So sometimes we are in a cultural village setting, and we are performing a rain dance in the drought season. We are performing a morning dance but because nobody is careful enough to even talk about the interpretation of all this. So we have cultural villages as systems for transmission that tourism has adopted, which for me are shortcuts. And then we have, there's the whole explanation of what is going on has been lost. It's just become performances. It's just become a little bit of using certain deco. I will give this example. As I do this, please write your questions. Michael, put up the questions on the chat so that Doctor will take on them right now, the ones that were asked in advance and the ones that are being asked now. I want to give this example on why sometimes tourism can devalue indigenous knowledge systems and even cultures. There's this piece of bag that I learned in my work in Masai Mara with the Maasai community. There's this piece of bag that would only be carried by women who have not had children, by barren women, and they would carry it. It was made by them. It was made very specially. And at a certain time of the year, this woman would carry these bags and they would walk from one village to another, seeking the blessing of the elders to get children. And as they met people along the way, they would put gifts in this bag for them. And this bag was very special, that if you saw a woman carry that bag, you will know her pain. You will know that it's a woman who's been trying to get a child and hasn't gotten a child. And they will take these long treks to go to where the older ones in the village, the elders, going to seek for blessings. One time as I worked in a tourism company organization in Masai Mara, there's somebody, the lodge owners or something had seen this bag, and it is fascinating to see it. When you see it, you'd like to have it as an ornament. And there was a guest, a high profile guest that was coming to the lodge, and they wanted to give the lodge, the guest a gift. And they decided that the guest would get this bag. And I was so disturbed. I'm like, but this bag has meaning. This bag is just not made for anyone. It's just not made for everything. How do we give it to this high profile guest without telling the story, and they will take it as an ornament? Long story short, I was not the final say, and a bag was ordered and it was made and it was given to the guests, who took it and probably is hanging them somewhere in their house today, somewhere in Europe, not knowing that this bag carries a story of pain, that this bag carries the story of desperation of a woman who has been struggling in a rural setting to get a child and has not gotten a child. And every time she carried this bag, she carried it with tears and pain. But suddenly it was an instrument of gift because it looked beautiful and it looked unique and it looked different. This is how those knowledge systems, as they carried that bag, as they moved from one village to another, they gained knowledge, they talked along the way, they were blessed by the laying of their hands so that they could get children. They were able to, probably somebody would give them new herbs for ways that would increase fertility. There's a whole story and knowledge behind this bag, but it is lost because it was commodified and it became a gift. I just want us to understand how sometimes when you said that tourism and modernity and probably part of the histories of colonization has devalued some of our indigenous knowledge systems and even our cultures. This was a way in which women without children felt that they were welcomed in society, that they would go out and this is one way that they would then avoid stigmatization. This is just one example. I have many, many of them. But right now, allow us to go into the questions. I know as I say this, there are many of you who have worked in tourism who can recall many instances when indigenous knowledge has been trivialized or devalued in the name of art and craft and performances, because that is today's way in which tourism transmits this knowledge. Michael, do we have our questions from our participants that Doctor could respond to?
Yes, they are already in the chat.
Yeah, I've just seen one. Doctor, how do we change this narrative that traditional knowledge is backward practice? How do we change this narrative?
Okay, I'm at question number 1. Let me just move to, are we going order of okay. Sorry, Judy, you can read that question again because I was reading it in a different order. You just read the order that you...
I just took the one that I saw right on my on my chart.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got number one. I got number one here from Michael. It says, what challenges or barriers exist in effective integrating Indigenous knowledge into sustainable tourism development? Can I answer that one first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Can we go in that order?
Yes.
The biggest barrier or challenge that I would think of is most of the time we don't have protocols or regulations that can guide us when we're trying to bring Indigenous knowledge into sustainable tourism development. And that's a risk of disaster because we need to protect our Indigenous people and this knowledge from other exploitation and misrepresentation, what we're experiencing already now of tourism experiences in cultural villages, because we are thinking of integrating it, and we think we are promoting and preserving Indigenous knowledge through certain tourism experiences, but we're actually harming the Indigenous knowledge because we are misrepresenting it. As Judy said, sometimes even the way we practice some of these things, it's not rainmaking during a, we need to, and tourists also need to feel that they are learning the authentic culture, not some staged. Staged, then it must be communicated. So we need to also be true to ourselves and visitors about Indigenous knowledge systems. So also needs to be to feel that what they're coming to experience, they must be told that this certain ritual is an, or it's practiced at a certain time, or there need to be education, there need to be information so we can represent this Indigenous knowledge in as much authentic. Obviously, it's 100% authentic because it's not presented in its original transmission that it was supposed to be done. But if we are presenting it for tourism activities, we need to find and guidelines which are centered on Indigenous people, because it's Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge holders who decide, because it's their knowledge. And not every knowledge is for tourism consumption or for sustainable tourism. Some knowledge is sacred and it's not to be consumed by other cultures or by other. We need to look at the protocols and say this ritual cannot be talked about because Indigenous people, it's a sacred thing for them. So we need to respect that. So I have of barriers that I can think of. Should I go to the next question? How do we make sure that culture is authentic and not forgotten or negatively influenced by visitors? How cultures, I think that can also go into what I just discussed now, that it needs to be authentic. So tourists needs to be educated. They need to feel when they come and experience this cultural exchange taking place. There's more than just, we are moving away from the tourism that was just absorbing, yeah, through performance and through, we need to create a tourism that is transformational. So when visitors come to experience, when there's cultural exchange taking place between the host and the visitor, there need to be a deeper transformation that's happening, yeah? So when the tourists leave that Indigenous Knowledge Center or cultural village, they feel transformed. They feel they've learned something. They feel like they went to a university and got a qualification on certain signs of Indigenous people. So this is how we should look at and providing authentic experiences. And forget negativity influenced by visitors. As I said, we need to put protocols, guidelines, yeah, and educate tour operators, give them guidelines. Like I always give example of, if I can give example of what we call in Southern Africa, township tourism. And I know I think in Kenya, you call it slum tourism. And you've got Kibera. People go visit Kibera, the slums. It's a tourism attraction. And is it sustainable? I know there is some positive impact on those who are conducting this, so that they receive an income. But we need to look at, if they're coming to a township to experience some of the Indigenous knowledge, yeah, is it done in a sustainable way? So we need to look deeper into these things and find ways that we can promote Indigenous knowledge in a sustainable way. Let me go to the next question. How to commercialize Indigenous knowledge sustainably? I think I've also touched a bit on that, and on finding ways to I wouldn't think it's really commercialized. I think we should move away from sustainability and sustainability principles. Even if you look at the current trend, talking about circular economy, tourism circular economy, it's always turning the tables around and looking at sustainability first, and then profits comes later. And when we're talking about commercializing Indigenous knowledge, we should actually not think of commercializing, but look at educating, bringing awareness, trying to bring back what was lost, to revitalize the suppressed knowledge system, rich knowledge system that was lost, to educate people. And that education is part of sustainability, is part of sustainable development goals. So use tourism, use sustainable tourism to educate not only the visitors, but also to educate the Indigenous people themselves, the future generation. Put that as a core, and then look at ways to provide income through that. But the core must be education. The core must be sustainability. And then obviously, for example, if you have an Indigenous knowledge center, maybe you will charge a certain amount of money to gain a certificate in animal tracking. You come to the sand communities at the Nyanyai Conservancy, and you come to experience how to do tracking. Yeah. And after you finish doing your tracking experience, learn about tracking, you get a little certificate. And there's exchange, the way you exchange. And then you pay for this certificate. And the visitor also takes that certificate as something that they've gained. I think that could be an example of sustainability, and how you can, I wouldn't like to call it commercialized, but how you can use Indigenous knowledge as a value that can be beneficial to both the visitor and also beneficial to the holder of this Indigenous knowledge, or the transmitter of this Indigenous knowledge.
Thank you so much. Can I ask Dr. Emmanuel Frimpong? You've had your hand up, joining us all the way from Ghana. And welcome to our guests. I've seen London, I've seen Uganda, I've seen Ghana. There's so many from Kenya. And I'm looking through the chat as I listen. Karibu sana, welcome. Karibu is welcome in Kiswahili. Feel at home. Go ahead, Dr. Frimpong, if you could unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Judy and Dr. Sisco. This is very insightful. My question has to do with how we can transmit Indigenous knowledge in digitalized form. And I think you've mentioned quite a number of things. If you look at what happened in 2020, the COVID time, it was clear that Africa had solution, but it was totally ignored. We had medicine that could cure COVID, but it was totally ignored. And I can use my grandfather as an example, who was a fetish priest and had such an enormous knowledge in herbal medicine, but nobody is picking it up. So how do we translate that, digitalize it so that people will not take advantage of it as the Chinese are already doing? They take our knowledge, go use it, bring it back to us and charge us at a fee for it. How do we digitalize it so that that can be there? Next generation after it will know that this is how it is done. All the things we've talked about. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Emmanuel. It's very, very, I don't have all the answers myself. I'm still doing research. I'm still learning as well. But from my own perspective, I really feel that we need to put strong legal policies in place to protect our indigenous knowledge. And you know, the biopiracy and all that is happening in the way our indigenous plants are used. Like, for example, even cosmetics that I'm using currently now is I'm paying so much money for these cosmetics, but the ingredients are coming from the conservancy where I'm actually doing my research, which working on, you know. So this is just and medicines that we are using, that I'm buying, it's to fight, maybe if you have certain illnesses, they are coming from the conservancies around the corner from where I live. But I have to go and buy this medicine, very expensive. So these are a lot of challenges, and within now with the lenses, because I'm looking at this through the lenses of tourism, and I think tourism, if it can be used as a tool to educate, because it's in tourism that from an African context, that we have an opportunity for a voice, because our indigenous knowledge cannot fit into Western education that we are a product of. And we are a product of Western education, Western paradigm of thinking, yeah, Western epistemology, not African epistemology. So we can now use tourism, because tourism cannot go in the curriculum, and it will take a long time for our African governments to actually put this knowledge into our curriculums and do a whole paradigm shift. So we can also play our role in tourism to educate, yeah, the global world about the value of our indigenous knowledge. That's why I say, don't have cultural villages, call them indigenous knowledge centers. Let tourists come and learn and give them a certificate that they attend a week event on how to do trekking, on how to make Mkomboti beer, yeah? And they learn, because Mkomboti beer is a traditional beer. It was ancient chemists, they're scientists who made these beers. Come and learn how to do that. And after that, your experience, you get a certification. And then you pay for that certification. So the tourist takes back something more than just coming to taste the beer, more than just coming to be amused like we are in Disney World by people dancing. Yeah. So let's bring depth into tourism. Let's use tourism as an education tool, and try to use it to not to integrate, not to integrate it into but to harmonize it into modern life.
Yeah, profound. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope, yeah, that was a learning one. That last statement from you was a powerful one. How about if we start changing the narrative by not talking about cultural villages, but calling them Indigenous knowledge centers, where visitors come to learn, and they learn the science, and they leave with a qualification because it is an Indigenous knowledge center. And you know that what that will take? It will take us to shift away from this rush, hit and run tourism model, which we must shake ourselves from. I don't know how long that will take, but the fact that we have this number of days and we have to hit at every little place for a few minutes and move on to the other one, it stops the travelers from learning. Even if they go to these centers, they end up being entertained like Disney World, and they look at the entertainment and they go away, but there's no connection with place and there's no learning of place. So two operators who are here, tourism people who are here, tourism marketers and destination people who are here, remember the name we are going to use going forward is Indigenous Knowledge Centers and not cultural villages. Yeah, so that people come, by the time you leave that center, you have learned something profound about the Indigenous knowledge systems of the people that has preserved them and has preserved the places that we are visiting today, that we are calling pristine. And Aisha asked us how we changed the narrative, because this traditional knowledge is mainly seen as backward kind of practice. And I think Dr. Sisco has repeated this several times in her presentation and responses, that part of it has got to do with how we ourselves are communicating. Part of it has got to do with the transmission systems. We've even had from Emmanuel this question on how do we transmit Indigenous knowledge in digital forms. I think that is a space. Despite all the challenges raised by Dr. Sisco, we can still look at ways of transmitting Indigenous knowledge through the digital systems and the spaces. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be fighting back, like Dr. Sisco has said about our Indigenous knowledge system. Somebody will fight back, will definitely fight back. But yet we know that as they fight back, as Big Pharma fights back, for example, when we talk about Indigenous medicinal knowledge, we also know that there's a lot of biopiracy that is going on. The same stuff that we have is what is being harvested and being processed in labs and being packaged into capsules and other things. But the knowledge, the resource is actually with our people. So how do we start sharing this Indigenous knowledge systems in a digital space so that we can communicate that the resource is actually ours, and there is a science and there is a way that this have been used before. There's one more question here. I can see Michael says, what are the reasons why we need to build Indigenous knowledge systems in sustainable tourism? I think that was covered in the presentation, but if you could just give an overview in a sentence or so, and Michael will also tell us how much time we have. We still have about 15 minutes to go. Yeah.
Okay, can you repeat the question again?
So one that says, why do we need to build Indigenous knowledge systems in sustainable tourism?
As I mentioned, that we need to think, because sometimes when we talk about sustainable, we're only thinking about sustainable tourism involves protection of the natural environment. But when it comes to Indigenous knowledge, environment is not in isolation of everything else that's living. There's an interconnectedness of everything: societies, the people, the environment. And when it comes now to education, and I said, let's use education as the core, as a core driver of harmonizing Indigenous knowledge into sustainable tourism. Because Indigenous knowledge, as I said, they saw, even in a lot of sites, there's a lot of heritage sites. Like in Namibia, we have the rock art that has rich knowledge, Indigenous knowledge. And in the past, we have anthropologists and archaeologists coming to study the Sand people, or coming to study, trying to find interpretation of this Indigenous knowledge, but they are coming from somewhere else. Yeah, they're not and sometimes that information is distorted. Yeah, and they always say knowledge is acquired through experience. That is the most important role of learning knowledge, through experience. Yeah. And now when tourists are coming and they are visiting as a tourism experience itself, it's an experience. So if tourists are coming to experience a certain place or heritage site, they need to experience the knowledge, and they need to experience the authentic knowledge. Not knowledge that they read in the guidebooks. Lonely Planet was written by somebody else. They need to come and experience it from the mouth of the Indigenous person who's telling the story, who's doing storytelling, who's telling the myths, the folktale, who's showing you the mask. Yeah, this is the mask. We use it for initiation. We use this for this. This is, learn it from the authentic person. Yeah. So this is the paradigm. We need to shift the paradigm and really focus on this type of tourism that is more transformational and educational. I hope I was able to give you some insight.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I want to pick on one more. I love the thinking of cultural villages becoming Indigenous knowledge centers. Yes. The last statement was really instructive. Well done, blog. Industry in the largest source markets is increasingly treating sustainable tourism as niche and moving away from DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and responsibility. For communities in the global south, is it best to focus on the most committed tour operators and give up on trying to change the industry? That's a question.
I think Judy, you must help me with that one.
Yeah, I think we should, Benjamin Curry, thank you for being here. I think we should do both. We should focus on those who are already committed. And out of that, we should also voice, this is a concept, sustainability is a concept that requires advocacy. It's a movement. There's no movement that ever succeeded without advocacy. Whether we're talking about movements for human rights, it doesn't succeed without advocacy. You can't depend on the few good people staying good, yeah, and not trying to influence the others to change. So there has to be an element of advocacy, and this is the advocacy. It might take time. Yeah, we've got laggards and we've got early adopters. Then we've got those who stay in between, who want to wait and see. So the early adopters are the good ones that we should focus on. They should also influence their supply chain, because if they're powerful, they can influence their supply chain to change, and advocacy must continue. So yes, we will focus on those, but we need to change the industry. There are only a few good people or good businesses so far in the industry that we cannot just say it's enough for them. They will not even be able to meet the needs and the demand from the industry. So the advocacy, the lobbying, the campaign to have a change in mindset for the entire industry, to begin to value, become responsible, to begin to pay attention to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is very, very important. And that's why we see the emergence of the equivalent of what we call civil society organizations within the tourism industry, those that are pushing for this agenda using different forum, using different instruments in the industry, like certification has been used as an instrument to show the difference between those who are responding and those who are not. So my short answer to this is that we need to work on both, support those who are already doing it more and advocate for the rest of the industry to change. I saw another question. To operators, travel advisories, we have a huge role to play in educating guests. Yes, Claudia, tour operators have a huge role in educating guests. I have been to a few places, many lodges in Eastern and Southern Africa. And there are a few places where I have found a local person with the title, either in some places they call them naturalists, in some places they call them cultural ambassadors, and these are the guys who will give a talk about the community as a way of educating of the cultures of the place, of the history of the people and the history of the place. And in one place, I asked the facilities, why do you call this person a naturalist? Are you afraid to just say that they're going to talk about the people, their cultures, and their livelihoods? Why call them a naturalist? Because when you call them a naturalist, there are a lot of people like, they're going to talk to us about plants and they're going to talk about, but when you ask the naturalist, he'll tell you, no, I'm actually going to talk about our indigenous knowledge systems and how we related with nature and how nature provided for us, for our medical needs, provided for our food, provided for our justice systems, so that in some communities, if there was conflict in community within brothers, or there was incest or something, there was a particular plant that was boiled and they each drank of it, and for that there was forgiveness and cleansing. So nature was the courts and the justice system. Nature provided for medicine. Nature provided for food. Nature provided for many, many different things. So the naturalist told me, no, I will talk to them about how for us, this environment means more than just the wildlife that they see roaming around, that it is actually the place of our life, the source of life, like I said right from the beginning. So even this terminologies that are picked by tourism, and that's why we talk about the narratives that are picked and are perpetuated. And I was like, so why wouldn't just give you the right title, right? You are here as a carrier of indigenous knowledge, and you're going to share that with the guests who are interested in coming out with you on a walk in the forest or in the natural area, so that you can tell them your indigenous, how you related with this. So why we need to change the entire industry is, first of all, by changing the narrative. Narratives are so powerful. They are so powerful, they're ingrained in our minds, yeah, because they're repeated so many times. You see an itinerary of travel so many times that is almost ingrained in your mind that that is how travel should happen. That is how you should consume the destination. So the first thing that we need to change must change the narratives. As much as we've been talking sustainable tourism for more than 2 decades, almost 2 decades now, the narratives in the tourism industry and how they tell the stories of the places have not changed. They talk about, oh, we have changed practice, we have won that award, we have gotten that certification, but when you go to the narratives on how they present place, for the one that has a gold award, for the one that has whatever award or certification, and the one that has none, they both describe the place in exactly the same way. And this is the power, because some are afraid that if they change the narrative, they will lose on customers, because customers will not recognize that destination. So we must be deliberate to change the narrative of how we present places by starting to tell this, including the stories of place, the indigenous knowledge, how to even consume them, how they were transmitted, and be very honest about learning culture. If you are going to spend time to learn about these people, allow yourself in your itinerary not to have a 30-minute break or stop in a cultural village, which includes buying and dying, and then you have entertainment for 10 minutes, then you go back and say that you had a cultural experience. Allow yourself enough time. Look for an itinerary as a traveler that allows enough time for you to immerse yourself. And like Dr. Sisco says, live there with one knowledge that you have been certified that you can make Koboti beer, or you can make a banana beer like they do in Uganda, or you can light a fire like the Maasai do by rubbing sticks together. You have learned something about that indigenous knowledge systems of the people. I'll just see if there's any question. Is there any question we have not tackled, Michael? Is there any questions we have not tackled before I give Dr. Sisco to give her last parting shot? A last parting shot to all of us today?
Yeah, we have tackled all the questions, unless if there is any that is burning, maybe you can give one or two. We have finished our time. Is now on top of time, but maybe one or two, and then Dr. Sisco will give her remarks.
Anybody with how best can we protect our culture not being exploited? I think this was tackled. Kawape, Zukia, maybe you joined us late. To avoid exploitation, many organizations are making fun of our culture. Yes, we said Dr. Sisco gave a historical background to this, why culture is not valued today. She has talked extensively about education systems. And we have also talked about the structure of our tourism industry. I was just talking about the narratives and how tourism is packaged today. And that narrative devalues culture, because you will find that it is not given the prominence it deserves. I will repeat one thing that we said at the Sustainable Tourism Africa Summit in June, right? Today, I will give an example of the entry fees. If you go to enter a protected area to see wildlife today, in Kenya, your entry fees to sit in your vehicle and enjoy the landscape and see the wildlife could range anything from $200 a day, right? Between $100 and $200 a day. You heard Dr. Sisco say that to go to, I'm going to use the right word, to go to an Indigenous Knowledge Center, you will be charged $6. How unequal can we be when it comes to our cultures? How unequal can we be? And how this just goes to show how culture is not valued, even in the industry. Yet, without those indigenous knowledge systems, those natural areas that we are looking at today in that wildlife, if the Maasai will not have indigenous knowledge systems that allowed them not to go to certain wet areas during a certain time, avoid conflict with wildlife, wildlife will then have their space and people will have their space. And so wildlife thrived alongside people. But when we want to go and learn about the cultures and indigenous knowledge systems that preserved that wildlife, we want to pay we're willing to charge $200 for the people to see, our guests to see the wildlife, but $6 to hear the stories of how they preserve that wildlife. That's why there has to be a shift in our mindsets when it comes to these continents and how we value our own cultures. How we value our own cultures and how we want to share them with the rest of the world. There was a hand that is raised up, and make it short. Hanyisa Mabese, please ask your question. And then after that, Dr. Sisco will give her closing remarks. You've got like 30 seconds to ask your question.
Sorry, I'm Kanyisa Mabese from South Africa.
Yes.
I just want to say it's just a comment. I'm not sure what it is, but I would say we as travel agencies, like people, Black people who are African people who are entering the travel and tourism business, it is up to us to authenticate and our sustainability as well as our indigenous knowledge, so that when we package what we are packaging, let it be authentic, so that when you sell it, it becomes your unique selling point, whether a person has experienced or not. But your unique selling point should be that I'm indigenous and you are experiencing my indigenous nature. That's my piece that I can say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that comment. Yes, we must be proud of presenting our indigenous knowledge and cultures the way we want to present them, not the way the market wants to consume them. That is very, very important. Dr. Sisco, your parting shots.
Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you so much to all the participants for joining us in this very interesting conversation. And as Michael has shared my email address, I'm still available. If some of the questions I was not able to engage with you, so you can still engage after the webinar. And my closing remark is actually just to stress on the point that tourism is a global industry. It's an industry that brings different cultures together. Whether you're African, you're Asian, you're European, it brings all of us together because we are all human on this one planet, yeah? And we all share the same sky. We are all together. And we can use tourism sustainably through collaboration, sharing best practices. There's indigenous communities in Canada, in Americas, in Australia. They all experience sometimes similar issues when it comes to indigenous knowledge. So let's share best practices. Let's collaborate with other tourism organization to change this paradigm. Yeah, because it's not the other against the other. It's more about harmonizing. Yeah, harmonizing our worldviews because we all have different worldviews and giving respect to the diversity of worldviews. This is our knowledge. And harmonizing it together to find solutions to our problems in the future. And let's use tourism as a tool because they said education is gained through experience. Thank you so much for this opportunity and the platform.
Thank you so much. Education is gained through experience. Thank you for that wonderful closing statement. As I've listened to you throughout this presentation, I have learned a lot of things. I have taken a lot of notes, and in my own conclusion from what I have heard from you today, Dr. Sisco, is that the value of a place or a destination is incomplete without the understanding of the indigenous people and their knowledge system and the harmonization of that with what we are trying to share with the world today. So we cannot have a value of a place, yeah, without the acknowledgement, yeah, of the indigenous knowledge systems and cultures of the people who are in that place. And that will only be achieved through education. And that will help us then to harmonize. And the word that you have used today consistently is that harmonization is stronger than integration. Integration is almost like bringing on board, yeah, but harmonization is like blending, right? Not just adding something else, but harmonization is blending both of them. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We have got a monthly webinar series normally in the third week of the month. Today, I want to give a big shout out to all those joining us: South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Uganda, Switzerland, UK, I don't know, Kenya. There are so many of us here today. Dr. Sisco, this was quite a discussion that has attracted diversity of people from different continents to just join in here and listen in. If you know somebody who will benefit from this and has missed this, the link will be, the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and the link will be shared with all those who registered to participate, so that you can refer to these conversations if you need to in future. We have a conversation coming up, and I've just, my team might not be like, Judy, what are you talking about? But out of this discussion, I just felt like our next discussion will be on duck tourism. Our next discussion will be on duck tourism. When you started talking about slums and Kibera visits and Soweto, and there are many other forms of duck tourism, which includes orphanage tourism. There are people who still think that it is social value to take your guests to go and look at children in a children's home. That is part of duck tourism, if you are not aware, because we always say that our children are not tourist attractions, that they should, we should take different people every day to go and look at them and hold them. So if you're here and you're excited about conversations about duck tourism, stay in touch. We will announce the dates for the month of August for our next webinar. If you want us to inform you, please drop your email address. Michael will note it down. We'll make sure that you don't miss the next webinar that you have. And if you're interested in a particular topic, current affairs, issues in sustainable tourism, please write to us and we will be happy to cover the topics that you are also interested to listen to. So thank you so much for being here. I know Michael is going to ask us to put on our videos if we can for a minute. We'll stop the screen sharing, and if we can take a screen group photo. If you're excited to be here and you would like to do that, we are happy to have one with you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You are all wonderful people. I can see you, very wonderful people. Thank you for coming. Stay in touch with us. We want to stay in touch with you. We want to learn together. I see a few people that I know. Hi, Vanessa. Thank you for coming.
Hello, madam.
Thank you so much. I see several young change makers. I see new people. I see very many new faces. We are excited, so excited to have you. Michael, you let us know when you have taken your group photos. Thank you very much.
Yes, let's continue. Let's continue. Some of us, I cannot see our faces. If you are able to, you can have your video on. Thank you. And I think we should sign off by our nationalities. Yeah, say where you are joining from. I'll be left looking at the chat, taking your emails.
Nairobi,
if
Kenya.
You are referred, yes, if you are referred by your friend and probably you did not register, you must make sure to keep in touch with our social media, especially on X, or rather Twitter. Yes, I'm waiting for us to continue.
I mean, LinkedIn is also very active. We post most of it on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. Namibia, thank you. Kenya, I can see people posting where they are from.
I'm from Kenya.
Thank you. Uganda. Thank you so much for coming. Kenya. Thank you everyone for coming. I know Michael has shared an email address. If you also want to reach out to us, Michael, you can share an email address on the chat. Oh, Kenya Siaya,
Yes.
Thank you for coming all the way. Ropa from Zimbabwe, thank you for joining us. Oh, Moratiwa from Botswana. Thank you, Molema, for joining us. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Hey. The screen is so huge. I see.
Ghana
The
is
screen is so
here.
huge. Thank you. I've taken now.
Hi.
We are
Thanks,
free to
everyone.
engage.
Stay safe if you're in Kenya. We're going through a season, but we are well. Thank you so much. Thank you. You can, I think Michael has shared. I will share another email address, knowledge@sttakenya.org. Send me the topics that are of interest to knowledge@sttakenya.org. The knowledge@sttakenya.org of the topics that are of interest. I will discuss them with you and we will see how to rock them in. Thank you so much, Tavile Sewe. Oh, nice to meet you here. Yeah, nice to meet you here. And we will discuss. Did I just share my, knowledge@sttakenya.org. Okay. And also remember that here you can meet people you can network with. You might meet somebody here who is of interest to the work that you do. And you are keen. There is, I don't know whether Aisha has left, but Aisha runs a very authentic, she was here in one of our webinars earlier on. I think I still consider the center that she runs as the one that has immersive experiences. She's from Uganda. If you ever go to Uganda, you will go to that center and you will not just, there are no performances in that center, there are immersions. You do it, you engage and you do it. There's no one who is performing for you. If it is about how to dress, you're shown how to dress and you dress up the Ugandan way and you sit and eat the Ugandan way. You are not in a theater where you are looking at cultural performances. It's one of those that I'm really excited to know somebody who runs an authentic, and Aisha, today we know what we are going to call it here. It is an Indigenous Knowledge Center. It is an Indigenous Knowledge Center. It is not a cultural village anymore. And I'm so glad to see some of my friends from academia who work with us on the Young Changemakers program. Stella Mwawaza, thanks for being here. I know we are now going to tell our students about systems of transmission of Indigenous knowledge in the tourism industry. And we will not talk about cultural villages. We'll talk to them about Indigenous knowledge centers. Yeah, and we have all learned about the systems from transmission of this knowledge. Thank you so much. There is Vekulane Cultural Museum in Kavimba, Chobe, Botswana. Next time I'm in Botswana, Mambo Tema, I will let you know. I will let you know, and I will look for your village. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, Michael, over to you. Thank you everyone for coming. And the change makers that I have seen here, thank you so much for coming.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. We are free to leave. I've taken note of all your emails. I am here for the next 1 or 2 minutes in case somebody will drop a new message. But we are free to leave, and thank you so much again for coming. Okay, and let's keep safe wherever we are. We need to meet you again in August and in consequent months. Right? Thank you, Robert Bogonko from Rukinga Conservancy. I think you've never missed any of the webinar series for this year. One of the consistent attendees. Thank you for even spreading the gospel. Okay.
Sorry, I have joined late, but I would like to the team to share me with the proceedings of the session, because the time that I checked was on 11, but then I see so like you guys have started before 11, so I just joined a bit late.